Once again, when you go to a calendar website and you enter your meeting, and the moment you open up a box and you type the calendar and you click publish, it shows that meeting right there in the calendar on the web page. That's instant showing. If you look at websites like when you go to music websites, and when you select a genre and you select a music, and that music, its information is displayed right over there. So if you select a music and on YouTube or one of these video playing websites, this video gets populated right there. That happens through Ajax. But the reason why it happens so instantaneously is because between your user screen and the web server, along with the database, the server and the database is what we have created is an Ajax engine, which basically interacts with an XML document. So today, in order for us to create a web-based application, the first place that we will start out from is creating an XML document. Now, JavaScript has ActiveX objects and the XML XHTTP request object, which allows you to create ActiveX objects, and the XHTTP request objects, which allows you to create an automatic object that writes Ajax for you. And you're going to see that right away. So in a web-based application, of course, you will have to start out first by designing how your page is going to look like. So in our application, as you can see, that because it's a spreadsheet, what we are going to do is we're going to go ahead and record. We would go ahead and create a table. So if I was, and I'm going to show you the code of the HTML document, the only thing that the HTML document is going to have is the code of a table. And of course, the different colors that you see, like the total color has orange and yellow, those are coming through CSS. So we're going to use a combination of HTML to create the front-end design. But the population comes through programming. So now, the first thing that I would like to point you towards is, let's look at a very simple XML document. All XML documents, so as you can see, that this is, I would go ahead and ask you to look at the XML document. Notice here that, remember I told you, an XML document always mimics the table of a database. So if I have a table in a database with a column called 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and 3 rows, 1, 2, 3, and they are all filled with numbers, this is a table in the form of a spreadsheet. Databases will record your information like this. Now we're keeping it simple so that we all understand. But this could be in a professional application. This could be a student's database. This could be a customer's database. So what we could have here is instead of the first column to be column 1, we could have first name, last name, city, state, address, phone, zip, email. And then on each row, you would have each customer's name. You see that? So when you learn databases, and those of you who already know what databases are, remember, all data is stored inside databases in the form of tables that are related to each other, and that's why, hence it's called a relational database. So whether you're looking at Access, which is one of the smaller databases, or whether you're looking at Oracle, which is one of the larger databases, or the Microsoft SQL Server, the base bottom, in all these databases, the data is always stored in tables. So now you look at this table, assume that this table right now is in our database, and if I ask the database to export this into an XML document, my XML document will look like what you see on your screen right now. So what the XML document will have, and here's all XML documents start out with a tag called question mark XML that lets it know, okay, this is an XML document, a version, right now we're using version 1.0, and that's just the start. This is what tells the system, okay, this is an XML document. This is a delimiting character. But then, the first thing that you want to start out with is the name of the table. So assume that this table is called the root. Why we call it the root right now? Because this is also known as the root element. So this generally would be the root. Now, this table has 3 rows and 5 columns. So now you notice, and what it's going to have is our numbers. So what we're going to do is we're going to say, we're going to start with the very first row, and each value will depict a column. So I will say, so I'll start here with num, and then I'll enter my value. So let's say the first value is 5.00, then I put /num. That's first row, and now I'm going through each column. So that's first column, there's column number 2, num. Again, let's enter a value 5.25 /num. And then I'll go num, and I can enter a value of 6.00 /num. And so this is a simple XML document because in this, all my columns are labeled as num, so it makes it more simple for me.
Question.
Sure. What's your question?
When you separate the continuous numbers, like the first row's got 5 and 6, and the second row's got 10, 8, and 4, when you make a space, does that mean anything, or is it?
Well, this is for my convenience.
Okay.
Right. But generally, what happens is, remember, we're making it simple, so we're keeping it all num. But in some XML documents, assume that if this customer's table was with first name, last name, city, state, zip, then what you would do? Well, then what you would do is in your XML document, you would start with customers, and then go /customers, and then you would create row 1, and then go /row 1, and in between row 1 you would go first name, John, /first name, last name, Doe, /last name.
That's creating
and
one
this
row.
way, and when row 1 completes, then you go to row 2. So in between, so this is a little bit, so again, this is the root element, then the child, and these are called nodes. So always remember, the first element of your XML is called the root element, and then these are called child nodes or nodes. Now, so this way, we go and enter a value for each column, and remember, we're calling it, our child node is called num, okay? So now that you've seen the XML document, now let's go ahead and get towards the CSS, okay? So I'm not going to spend too much time in CSS because you have learned that in your HTML class, but I'll still bring the CSS file here. So when you look at the CSS, you have to look at a design that you want for your web page. So let's say Oscar says, I want a big heading which says, my spreadsheet application. Now, how do you develop a big heading? H1. So in your CSS file, you will write a rule for H1. See that? Then, for all the columns, you want the background to be white. So I'm going to create a custom one. So H1 is a tag of HTML. You define your rule here, and it's a tag of HTML. But now, let's say for the columns, I want a custom one because I don't want to just say TD. Because if I just say TD, any other table where I enter and I put TD, that that color will go there too. Let's say I want a white color or an off-white color for my table cell inside the spreadsheet table. So here what I will do is I will go ahead and put, here I will go ahead and actually create a custom one, that's where the dot is, and call column. And then here I can say background pound C9EFC. So this is basically defining a custom entry in my CSS called .col. I will use this with the class equals. Then I will say, oh well, I want one for the row. So I'll say .row. Now you notice that the total column has a red color. So I will use .tote. So .tote will define my total. Then I have the main total, which is called the grand total, because if you look at the spreadsheet, all your rows and your columns also add up at the end. So here when I go with the other one, we go .gto, because I now want a different background color. You see that? In addition to that, the form below. Now for the form, I want a certain different type of button color. So whatever you have, I will define that using either a dot or a pound. The pound allows me, so I create a pound edit box. So whenever you define in CSS with a pound sign, you will, in your HTML, you will use it as an ID equals. Whenever you define something with a dot in your HTML, you will say class equals. So that's the difference between ID equals and class equals.